they're a path to resilience, ensuring that Anguilla prospers without placing extra burden on our families. And when it comes to tax revenue, Anguilla's tax revenue as a share of GDP is projected at 18.16% in 2025, a level that keeps us below the Caribbean average of 20 to 23%. And that's by design, Mr. Speaker. We're committed to careful tax management, about building a strong economy without raising the tax burden, and making careful tax policy adjustments to support this. By optimizing our tax administration and making every dollar count, we are ensuring that our growth serves you, the people. Our spending plan is clear, targeted, and focused on what really matters. We are still controlling recurrent expenditures with a forecast of $351.44 million EC dollars in 2025, increasing to $387.99 million by 2027. We are prioritizing investments in health, education, and public infrastructure, knowing that every dollar we spend is a dollar reinvested in our people. And we are laser focused on value, keeping our spending efficient, impactful, and aligned with the needs of our communities. By reducing our interest payments from $13.23 million EC dollars in 2025 to $9.7 million by 2027, we are freeing up more funds to go directly to the services you rely on. Mr. Speaker, let's touch on a comment I made at the start about today's realities versus yesterday's projections. We've heard much about a $22 million budget gap from 2022, a figure from a time that no longer reflects the Anguilla of today. That gap was part of a story that brought us to GST, yes, but since then, our needs, our priorities, and our commitments have changed dramatically and for the better, and our fiscal landscape has transformed. Take public safety, for instance. In 2023, we were supporting the Royal Anguilla Police Force on a budget of $10.8 million. But, Mr. Speaker, security isn't static, and neither are we. For 2025, we've set the baseline budget at $15 million, a 39% increase, because we understand that keeping our people safe means meeting today's demands, not clinging to yesterday's budget. Then there's the integration of the Department of Health Services and Department of Water Services. These two vital departments are now part of central government, with budgets that reflect the real costs of providing essential services. Just for the Department of Health Services, we're looking at a baseline of $37 million in 2025, yet we're not forecasting to cover even half of that through revenue. For water services, the story is similar, a $17.6 million budget, but revenues that don't come close to meeting that figure. And by revenues here, we're talking about money collected from those getting water and from those receiving health care. Mr. Speaker, the days of running these services on arrears are over. We've made a commitment in the MTEF to cover these costs in full, to wipe out the arrears, including every dollar of the $10 million owed to ANGLEC by the former Water Corporation. This is responsible governance grounded in today's realities. Let's talk about social services. Our commitment to our people, to our vulnerable, is stronger than ever. Social assistance has gone from $6 million per year to over $16 million. That's not just an increase. It's an investment in dignity, in security, in the lives of our seniors and those in need. The Senior Shield program has expanded, and with it, so has our dedication to providing a safety net that truly supports our people. On public sector compensation, we're seeing growth driven by our commitment to fair pay and essential services. From 2014 to 2023, compensation averaged around $87 million a year. But as we restore fair wages, bring on much-needed education, medical and emergency staff, and absorb Department of Health Services and Department of Water Services, our total wage bill for 2025 is projected at approximately $150 million. And Mr. Speaker, that's before the compensation review. This is not just payroll. This is an investment in the people who deliver the services our island relies on every day. And our capital investments, they are growing too because our future demands it. We're allocating $170 million over the next 3 years for infrastructure, excluding the airport redevelopment. This is a massive increase from the pre-2022 average of $11 million per year. That is $170 million EC dollars over the next 3 years for infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, other than what is included in airport redevelopment. This is what it takes to build and maintain the infrastructure that supports growth, resilience, and opportunity. Mr. Speaker, these are the needs of today, not the projections of the past. This is the Anguilla we are building, dynamic, responsive, and ready for the future, an Anguilla reimagined. We aren't bound by outdated figures. We are guided by what's real, what's urgent, and what's necessary for every Anguillian right here, right now. And we are addressing the deficits with a clear people-first plan. In the coming years, we face significant gaps. $59.72 million EC dollars in 2025, $60.86 million EC dollars in 2026, and $28.45 million in 2027, due to the large capital investment program. But let me assure you, Mr. Speaker, we're tackling these deficits responsibly. The fiscal plan is built to close that gap in a way that supports our growth, protects our people, and keeps Anguilla moving forward. To bridge this gap, we'll draw down $111 million EC dollars from our reserves over the next 3 years. This is a strategic move that lets us fund essential projects, build critical infrastructure, and support services, all without placing a heavier burden on our people now or in the future. Our reserves are there to support Anguilla in times of need, and today they are here to fuel our progress, ensuring that we continue to invest in the things that make us strong. Ours is a vision for a resilient, prosperous Anguilla. Mr. Speaker, the crux of our fiscal policy is balance. Every decision within the MTEF is intentional, rooted in comprehensive analysis, and aimed at ensuring Anguilla's long-term prosperity. We cannot implement measures that are not fully costed or tested against Anguilla's fiscal framework. Governance requires more than quick solutions or sweeping changes without a clear understanding of their full impact. The MTEF is designed to ensure Anguilla's stability, with each revenue measure carefully integrated to support not only today's needs, but also the needs of tomorrow. Our GST framework, for example, provides a steady revenue source that has proven both reliable and predictable. And while there may be calls to broadly exempt this or that, every exemption has a cost that, if not managed within a clear framework, undermines our ability to fund the essential services that Anguillians rely on. And so we must ask ourselves, do these proposals strengthen Anguilla's future, or do they risk compromising it? Mr. Speaker, as I shared last year, the Fiscal Responsibility Act lays down 3 crucial rules to keep Anguilla on a sustainable path. To summarize, our approach involves 3 key principles. First, we manage our debt prudently, keeping it within 80% of our recurrent revenue. Second, we ensure debt servicing remains under 10% of our recurrent revenue. And third, we maintain a reserve fund, safeguarding savings that cover at least 25% of our annual recurring expenditures. These aren't just targets, they're safeguards. They're about making sure that every choice we make today secures Anguilla's future, so we're building, not borrowing against the hopes of tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to report that we're fully compliant with 2 of these rules and will stay within those boundaries through the entire medium-term economic and fiscal plan. By 2027, we anticipate dipping near the minimum threshold for liquid assets ratio, but we remain above and in compliance. And furthermore, while we remain in breach of the desired debt service ratio for 2025, we're on track to meet compliance by 2026. And that would mean we would then be fully compliant with the 3 principles, Mr. Speaker. This progress is not by chance, but by responsible, deliberate planning. This compliance would not be possible should significant new borrowings be pursued. Mr. Speaker, this is responsible leadership. This is about safeguarding Anguilla's future, ensuring that the decisions we make today lay a strong foundation for generations to come. And we must thank our able-bodied civil servants throughout the government public service, but especially the Ministry of Finance, for their careful work that has gotten us to this point, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we all have a choice about the Anguilla we want to see, the future we are building, and the legacy we leave behind. This medium-term economic and fiscal plan is about real investments in our people, our infrastructure, and our resilience. We've made tough decisions, sacrifices even, all with a vision that puts Anguilla at the center. And this isn't just governance. This is leadership with a purpose, a commitment to building an Anguilla that works for everyone. So I urge you to look at this plan. Look at the investment in your communities, your families, and your future. This MTEF is our promise to build Anguilla that does more than survive. It thrives, it prospers, and it opens doors of opportunity for every single person. So let us go forward together, confident in our direction, united in our purpose, and committed to an Anguilla that is ready to seize the future. Let us build a legacy for generations to come so that they'll look back with pride and gratitude. This is our moment, Anguilla. Let us seize it together. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Thank you, Member.
Reports from committees? None. Petitions? None. Government notices? None. Private members' notices? None. Motions? Motion 1 of 2024, 5/12 HOA for the consideration of government's legislative agenda.
We will now resume consideration of the government's legislative program, which began at the previous sitting of this Assembly. According to Rule 13, the Leader of the Opposition may reply to the opening address at the next ordinary sitting of the Assembly. Member, you may reply to the Premier's address.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Good morning to the honorable members of this House, and good morning to the listening and viewing public, as well as those who may be here with us in this gallery. Joash, am I loud enough? Is it loud enough? Do I put it up? It's loud enough? Okay. Mr. Speaker, on 5th November 2024, the member for District 1 would have presented the government's legislative program for the period 2024 to 2025. It represents the final year of this government's 5-year term, the end of which the people of Anguilla eagerly await. The member for Island Harbor began his presentation by quoting 3 John chapter 1, verse 2, which says, "I pray above all things that you may prosper and be of good health," end quote. He went on to summarize the past 4 years as being year 1, he described as survival, year 2 as recovery, year 3 as revival, and year 4 as resilience. But it has now become clear that his description for each of those years and his reference to prosperity and good health was in fact reference to the government coffers and not to the people of Anguilla. In other words, it was not the survival of the people in year 1 to which he referred, but the survival of the APM government. It was not the recovery of the people in year 2, but the recovery of the government coffers. It was not the revival of the Anguillian people in year 3, but the beginnings of growth in the government revenue from overtaxing the people of Anguilla. And it was not resilience of the people in year 4 to which he referred, but the building up of reserves on the backs of the ordinary man. Let me further explain. As much as this APM administration would like us to, we cannot forget that this administration came to power on the back of a campaign of no GST. The country was closed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic since March of 2020, and the then AUF administration had been successful in protecting the people of Anguilla from the deadly pandemic. Resources had to be reallocated to improving our health facilities and taking care of our sick. And because the country was closed, our tourism sector was crippled. Our employees in the private sector were either underemployed or unemployed, and the government coffers were depleted as the government had to maintain government services as well as public service salaries. Recall that the COVID-19 had only been the latest external shock that had affected Anguilla at that time, as we were still recovering from the damaging effects of Hurricane Irma in 2017. The previous AUF administration met the banking situation, which was sitting from the year 2013, when the AUM administration had placed our two indigenous banks, NBA and CCB, under conservatorship. And on taking office, the Anguilla United Front administration in 2015 was charged with implementing a resolution. The banking resolution was a necessary and critical step for securing depositors' hard-earned savings in the banks and ensuring stability in our country. This banking resolution was ultimately supported by the United Kingdom government, the Caribbean Development Bank, the World Bank, and the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. And as a direct result of the banking resolution, today we have the National Commercial Bank of Anguilla as our only indigenous bank in Anguilla, the shares of which are owned by the government of Anguilla and by extension, the people of Anguilla. This AUM administration, after 4 years in office, despite the many criticisms that they've had, has never presented a feasible alternative to the banking resolution, not up until today. In fact, I would go as far as to say that given this administration's track record of continuing the work of the previous AUF administration, this APM government would not have done a single thing differently to save the people's money and to save our social security funds, which were held in our indigenous banks. This is obvious from the constant praise and support that they today give to the board, the management, and staff of the National Commercial Bank of Anguilla. In the face of this, it has proven difficult for this APM administration to praise the NCBA on the one hand and to criticize the debt which ensured the continued existence of the same NCBA on the other hand, and the saving of the people's hard-earned monies in the bank. The member for Island Harbor spent some time seeking to explain the reasons why he decided to accept the EC $100 million and sign on to the MOU, which the previous Premier and Minister of Finance, Honorable Mr. Victor Banks, had signed on with the UK government on 11 June 2020. This leader of government business has repeatedly stated that he was not aware of the state of the finances of the country until after the APM was elected. In fact, the APM seeks to paint the picture that they did not know that the country was closed and that the hotel sector was crippled. They did not know that very little revenue was being generated while public service still had to operate. They did not know that the country was still recovering from Hurricane Irma, and they did not know that COVID-19 was impacting the economy. Perhaps the leader of government business, the member for Island Harbor, was not aware that on the 7th of May 2020, before the general elections, in the Anguilla House of Assembly, the then Premier and Honorable Minister of Finance, the Honorable Mr. Victor Banks, stated the following, and I quote, "Mr. Speaker, we passed the budget in this honorable House with the clear understanding that there would be challenges, and we proceeded to dialogue with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. The Ministry of Finance estimated that we had a revenue budget of 253 million EC dollars, and we estimated that because of the close down, the impact on tourism and other sectors, that we could have a shortfall in revenue by December 31st of some $100 million. This was on the 7th of May, 2020. In other words, Mr. Speaker, we would need to find ways and means to meet that budgetary shortfall. These words are quoted in the article in the Anguilla newspaper dated the 18th of May 2020 for persons who are interested in finding and reading the article themselves. Mr. Banks continued, and I quote, "The British government and Baroness Shug agreed to give us support. On Friday, May 1st, I received a letter from Ben Merrick, the Director of the Overseas Territories. It outlined the conditions for the receipt of that support and assistance, the commitments that the UK was prepared to make, and what was required of us going forward. The British government pledged that the $241 million in expenditure that we estimated would be guaranteed. In other words, any shortfalls in revenue would be guaranteed. The discussions are that the assistance can represent somewhere up to EC $120 million. This is British taxpayers' money that the British government and her colleagues, Baroness Shug and her colleagues, are prepared to support the government of Anguilla with. We were told, the British government, that we were going to grant temporary government support. We told the British government that we were going to grant temporary government support of $800 a month through December 31st for persons who were not qualified under the Social Security Income Support Scheme. That scheme would be for a period of 6 months, and if that situation continued beyond the 6 months, the government of Anguilla will then take on that responsibility for an additional 3 months. There have been substantial reallocations within the $241 million to such critical sources such as the Anguilla Air and Seaports Authority, which has estimated a loss of revenue of $800,000 a month, and for which the government is to find $8.8 million for the next 9 months. $500,000 for the Anguilla Development Board to assist small businesses, in addition to $500,000 for another agency, $3.6 million for the Anguilla Health Authority, $4.3 million for the Anguilla Water Corporation, and $20.4 million for the government's assistance scheme for temporary benefits, end quote. Mr. Speaker, I went to the extent to read the quotes that are set out in the article in the Anguilla newspaper, because it shows that the MOU for the $100 million was no secret. Not only were these statements made in the House of Assembly, but they were quoted in the Anguilla newspaper in May of 2020. Now, here was a leader of a country on the eve of a general election, not politicking, but fighting to secure the stability and continued operations of a country in the face of a devastating pandemic. That was his focus. Ensuring that as a responsible leader of government, business, and premier, that he, Mr. Banks, took all steps to ensure that whichever political party took office, there was already a plan in place to ensure the continued operations of government, to ensure that unemployed persons were looked after, and to ensure that local businesses received support. The only way that the current premier could not have known of this detailed explanation of the $100 million funding from the UK government would have been if he was home and not in Anguilla, if he was not alive, or if he intentionally ignored the public statements made by the then premier for the sake of winning the 2020 general elections. In fact, the member for District 1 was well aware of the terms of the MOU, as prior to the general elections, he publicly stated that he had no intention of accepting the EC $100 million, and that if he was elected, he had a plan to move Anguilla forward. Today, we hear the many excuses as to why the premier was quote-unquote forced to accept the $100 million. He stated in his legislative address last week that he was told that he either had to accept the MOU or withdraw and go bankrupt in a week. He does not say who told him so, or even why he chose not to take advice, come to the public, or challenge the statements that were made to him. Had he done so, the premier would have found out that the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2013 specifically provides that every incoming administration has 6 months after a general election to prepare a general strategic plan relating to the financial, social, and economic affairs of an incoming administration. And in those circumstances, there was not a need to implement the goods and services tax in the way that they did in the following year. Instead, the member for Island Harbor told the people that he would accept the $100 million UK aid and, quote, continue to engage in dialogue with the FCO and the governor's office to request relevant amendments to the MOU that he considered burdensome, end quote. Did this administration ever renegotiate any provision of the MOU? It does not appear so. The only significant change this administration made to the MOU is that instead of implementing GST in phases as was agreed with the UK government and as set out in that MOU, this administration decided to implement it wholesale, one shot on the people of Anguilla, while we were still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. The track record of this APM administration has shown that they have been more detrimental to the people of Anguilla than any other administration in Anguilla's history. The premier spoke about the 18 fees that his administration imposed or increased on the people of Anguilla before they implemented GST. They had no regard for the welfare of the people, or the fact that they were making life more difficult at a time when they should have found ways to bring relief to the people of the country. They implemented the APM's version of the GST at a time when the country was still recovering amidst the protests and cries of the people. Even more diabolical was the use of the Attorney General and the Deputy Governor to force the GST legislation through when the majority of elected representatives in the House of Assembly voted against it. The Premier stated that the opposition voted against the various GST exemptions which came to the House, and I want to set the record straight on this. The members of the opposition in the Anguilla House of Assembly did not support the passage of the GST in 2021, and you can go back and check the records, it is clear. The members of opposition did not support the passage of GST in 2021 when it came to the House, or the implementation of GST in 2022. Our view was, and still remains, that one, it was not the right time as the people of Anguilla were still recovering from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. Two, other countries at the same time were not imposing new taxes on their people, but were instead providing support for individuals and businesses, and our APM administration should have been fighting to do the same. And three, there was no explanation as to why the APM government refused to implement the GST in a phased manner so as to ensure that the effects of a new tax being imposed at such a vulnerable time in Anguilla on the people of Anguilla did not significantly harm our people or our local businesses. Implementing the GST in a phased approach would have allowed the government to see the impact of each phase on the people of Anguilla. And it would have allowed them to adjust to fit accordingly. Instead, this APM administration chose to jam their version of the GST wholesale down our throats with no regard as to how people were surviving. The opposition members opposed the GST amendments which came to the House before implementation in July of 2022, because it was at that time we were saying to the government of Anguilla, there is still time for you to step back from the implementation of GST becoming effective on the 1st of July 2022. And there is still time for you to protect our people against the implementation of a wholesale GST at this point in time. And so it was on that basis that the members of the opposition chose not to support a GST amendment coming to the House at a time when the government still had the opportunity not to implement GST. The APM should have undertaken better negotiations with the UK government and should have obtained a better arrangement for us. They failed to do so. And so once the APM pushed forward an implementation of the GST, which kicked in on the 1st of July 2022, members of the opposition supported the amendments that came forward after that. This is because the APM refused to delay the GST and the law had become effective. So without the relief that our people would have received, they would have been worse off at that time. And it was on that basis that we supported every amendment that came to the House thereafter. But we continue to maintain the view that this APM's GST was and is not working for the people of Anguilla. In 2023, GST was estimated to bring in $90 million. Instead, it brought in $150 million, $60 million more than what was anticipated. And remember, just the year prior, GST was implemented to fill a $22 million gap. So 1 year later, $90 million is anticipated, $150 million comes in. Was it not an opportune time for the government, understanding that the people were suffering at that point in time from the high cost of living, the overinflation, the high cost of transportation, the high cost of electricity, to look at the state of affairs of our people in this country and adjust accordingly? And so, while the government coffers were becoming flush, our people have been suffering from overinflation, created in large part by this government's GST implementation. We have been suffering from the high cost of living, the high cost of food, the high cost of electricity, and the lack of salary increases in both the public and private sector, both the public and private sector, from 2008. The GST structure is still today damaging our local businesses, as it requires them to pay GST upfront on their imports, which impacts their cash flow. Their money is tied up in government, so they are unable to use it to hire more staff. They're unable to use it to expand their businesses. They're unable to use it to bring in additional products and to assist in keeping the wheels of the economy turning. They are crippled. And our local businesses have to pay this money up front, and then they have to wait until their goods are sold to recoup the GST, whenever that is. It is a nightmare, and the existing structure is threatening to destroy our local businesses. The average consumer, the average resident of Anguilla, and local businesses alike are struggling to keep their heads above water. And at the same time, the government, faced with the fact that the GST that they demonize is now bringing in so much revenue, what did they do? They decided to pour it into concrete in the hopes that the people of Anguilla would be fooled into believing that the people are doing better because the government coffers are doing better. But the reality is that very little is being done to address the urgent needs of the average man and woman in this country. And it is for this reason that the Anguilla United Front assembled a team of persons with various qualifications from various sectors across the length and breadth of Anguilla, in order to look at the existing GST structure and to propose ways in which we can bring some ease to the people of our country. We spent months gathering and analyzing data, running the numbers, finding ways to bring a measure of balance to ensure that government continued to obtain revenue, but in a sustained way so as to encourage businesses to not only remain open, but to expand its offerings and for Anguillians to once again shop locally and ensure that our hard-earned monies circulate in our own economy here in Anguilla. We identified that the removal of 4 areas from the existing GST structure would provide immediate relief for businesses and individuals. Removing the retail, wholesale, manufacturing, and restaurants from the GST structure and adding 9% on customs duties was the plan that we unveiled. And this adjustment would have translated to real savings for the people of Anguilla and assist in reducing the cost of living. The need to help our people was and remains so urgent, so critical, that we did not want to wait until elections to release our plan. Our people have been crying out for relief, and we, the Anguilla United Front, provided an avenue for this administration to provide that relief. You heard the Premier say in his presentation last week that the AUF GST relief plan is a delusion and an illusion. Yet, it was only after the release of our GST relief plan that the government seemed to have realized that the few structures that they are building are so indeed an illusion, and that they needed to take real and substantive steps to address the high cost of living. So what did this APM administration do? It looked at the AUF relief plan to see if it could find a way to keep the big money flowing and throw a little bone to the people of Anguilla. Enter the government's idea to use a portion of the AUF relief plan and remove GST just from food as opposed to the entire retail sector. Notice that it was only after the release of the AUF GST relief plan that you have heard the government rushing out to say that they will remove GST from food come January 2025. Not August 2024, not November 2024, but January of 2025. It is not lost on anyone that this is just months before a general election is to be called. The APM government acted against the views of the majority of the people of Anguilla in the passage of the GST in 2021, and they have continued to do so time and time again throughout their 4-term year in office. The Premier spoke about supporting education, but on coming to office, they had intended to close down the Anguilla Community College, and they in fact had ceased scholarships at that time. He spoke about supporting small businesses through the Anguilla Development Board, but on coming to office, they threatened to dissolve the Anguilla Development Board. He spoke about improving healthcare in Anguilla, but our healthcare is worse off today than we were 4 years ago. The government dissolved the Health Authority of Anguilla and brought health back under government, but we have yet to see a comprehensive plan as to how healthcare will be improved. Just like the APM's empty promise that it had a plan to move the country forward in 2020 without GST, so too is this government's empty promise to provide better health care in Anguilla. The doctors brought by the Premier the year before the general elections have not been back to Anguilla since. And the people have formed the view that this was yet another gimmick just to get elected. Senior Shield is a welcomed addition to the health services. We all value our senior citizens who have contributed to the development of Anguilla. Many of us take care of our parents or our grandparents, and it is good that there is a provision made for them to provide an ease on their family members when it comes to health care at the government facilities. Senior Shield needs to be expanded in certain areas, and we support the expansion. But I want to send this message to the people of Anguilla. The Anguilla United Front has no intention of removing Senior Shield. I have heard this Premier and other members of his government seek to use scare tactics by stating that if the AUF is elected, they plan to remove Senior Shield. Nothing to all go so. We are in fact saying to this APM administration that in 2023, the Attorney General advised you to put Senior Shield into legislation, to make it law. The opposition will support it, but no. Instead, they want to use it as a political football and as a scare tactic so that our senior citizens will think that they have to vote for the APM. It is terrible. We ought not to play with people's emotions, and certainly not with our senior citizens. We love them, we care for them, and they must be respected. I am therefore issuing a challenge for this administration to place Senior Shield in legislation as well as Junior Shield into legislation now. Do it before the next elections. If your intentions are honorable, then you will do so. The Premier spoke of the rising cost of electricity being of grave concern. But just yesterday, we have seen the pinnacle of this government's actions by terminating or causing to have terminated the Chief Executive Officer of Anglic without cause approximately 7 months before the end of his contract. 7 months before the end of his contract. And how do we know that the government played a role? Because the member for District 1 has repeatedly spouted on radio and in the news media that the APM's plan for the PPA will be able to move forward once the CEO for Anglic has been removed. He said it. And so the board, appointed by this administration, is only carrying out the wishes of the leader of government business and the APM administration. The consequences of this arrogant, ill-timed, and ill-advised decision will be borne not by the government, but by the people of Anguilla. We will pay for the actions and misdeeds of this administration. And up to today, this APM administration has yet to disclose to the people of Anguilla why they are insisting on going the way of a power purchase agreement with a third party instead of supporting Anglic's proposal for installing its own renewable energy infrastructure. Why? We've seen no plans from the government. We've seen no rationale, no explanation, but we see the insistence on going in that direction. It is more important to remove the CEO and continue to destabilize Anglic in order to achieve this PPA than it is to allow local Anguillians to develop our own infrastructure. The same can be said for outsourcing the management of our .ai domain name. This domain name and the returns we were benefiting from has nothing to do with this APM administration. They just happen to be sitting in the seat of government at the time that it has started to generate significant revenue of EC $8 million a month. This isn't a situation like a few years ago where the .ai domain name was generating only about $1 million a year, and where outsourcing would have been desired or even necessary to explore its possible yield. In fact, at one point in time in the early stages, as a result of the low yield, the Anguilla United Front administration at that time was interested in looking at outsourcing for that reason. But today, at generating a revenue of EC $8 million a month, we are in a far different location, a far different position than we would have been in all those years ago. And so, in the face of our God-given domain name, bringing in significant revenue on a monthly basis, this government has decided that there are no qualified Anguillians to manage the domain name, and decided to outsource the management of it without even having the decency to communicate with the many young Anguillian professionals in the sector. Not even to engage the single island-wide member, the Honorable Joseph Vanterpool, who has publicly spoken on the possibilities of generating even more revenue with our domain name. Time and time again, in this House of Assembly, on radio programs, in town hall meetings, over and over again. For a number of years now, Honorable Joseph Vanterpool has been speaking on this. But APM administration decided to outsource to a third party without even engaging our local people. An engagement that could have assisted in fine-tuning, honing, And even it may not have been necessary to outsource to a third party had those discussions taken place. The Premier spoke about the APM's plan for human development. But we see time and time again that our capable and qualified Anguillians are being overlooked and bypassed in favor of persons brought in to take up key positions instead. Brought into Anguilla to take up key positions. Not currently in Anguilla, brought into Anguilla. The reality is that the APM is a failed government. It has failed to look out for its people. It has failed to ensure that as a government grows and concrete flows, that its people and local businesses flourish. Our people are living hand to mouth, month after month, while our government ministers having increased back their salaries to 15% prior to the implementation of GST, are comfortable. And they seem more concerned with photo ops and jumping on bandwagons, pretending to take credit for things that they have nothing to do with, rather than understanding that our people need relief. The electricity subsidies is a gimmick. The food vouchers for senior citizens is a gimmick. When have you ever seen a government in good times give vouchers and credits to the people of a country? It says that the APM administration, although they are denying it, that they understand that our people are hurting. You would not give vouchers and credits to people who are doing well, who are prosperous, who are able to save for a rainy day and take care of their children. No. The credits are because there is a recognition that our people are not doing well. And so while the government coffers are overflowing and the APM administration is bragging that they have an overperformance of GST, our people are crying. And they're no longer being silent. You can see the various posts on social media. People are outlining their monthly income and their monthly expenditure and showing you that after the high cost of living, after the electricity bills, after the expenses that they have, they are in the red month after month. And so the reality is that we still need to implement the sort of measures necessary to be able to look out for our people. Real measures, not giving a food voucher here, electricity credit there, every so often, and we anticipate that coming up for the next election that more will be given. And the people will take it. Every one of us will take it because we need it and because it's ours. It's our money. It was taken from us. It's been taken from us for months. So when you give us a little $500, we're going to take it. When you give the senior citizens a $500 voucher, they're going to take it. But you're taking more from the people than you're giving back. And that is the problem. And that is why the vouchers and the credits are not enough to help our people in this country. And that is why our people are still screaming out for relief. Mr. Speaker, in terms of this year's proposed legislation, this administration rushed to announce the establishment of a Consumer Protection Department some months ago, but there was no legislation. So we have a Consumer Protection Department where persons have been assigned to the department. We assume they're doing work, but there is no legislation grounding that department. So I am happy to see that in the 2024-2025 legislative agenda, there is now a Consumer Protection Act, which is finally coming to the House at some point in time. I'm happy to see that after the AUM closed the festival's office between 2010 and 2015, its successor, the APM administration, now sees the need for the establishment of a festivals commission. And we're happy for that. I'm also happy to see that the Inland Revenue Department Penalty Waiver Committee Act will finally be passed. And this act should have been passed at the time GST was implemented so as to address unfair and burdensome penalties under the GST Act, which further burdens our struggling local businesses. And so I pray to God and I hope that this is one of the acts that will shortly come to the House very quickly so that our local businesses can receive relief. Mr. Speaker, being a voice for the hardworking and resilient people of this island, who have always strived to build a life of dignity and independence, I am saddened to hear and read on the various platforms of the plight the people of this country is going through. We have always been a people known for our strength, our resourcefulness, and our pride. We have never been a people who rely on handouts, nor have we sought anything more than the opportunity to work, to earn, and to build a better future for ourselves and our families. But here we are, year after year, facing budgets that were supposed to be about survival, recovery, revival, resilience. We were told these budgets would give us the means to thrive, that they would uplift our people and allow us to see true growth in our community. Instead, we see the government coffers growing richer and bigger, while our people find it harder to make ends meet. Where is the survival of the people when we're given vouchers instead of true opportunities? Where is our recovery when $500 electricity credits are handed out as if they will solve the issues of rising costs and our diminishing power to spend and grow? Where is the revival of Anguilla when so many of us feel we're falling further behind? When our young people can no longer afford to build their own homes? Mr. Speaker, where is the resilience we were promised if our people are left to rely on these handouts rather than being empowered to stand on their own 2 feet? This is not the Anguilla that we know. The Anguilla that we know is a home to proud, hard-working people who are determined to earn an honest living and to be able to provide for their families. We don't want to be kept alive with vouchers and handouts that come once a year, or maybe even more than once a year. What we want is to see real, lasting change that gives us the freedom to grow and to thrive. We want back the Anguilla where people sent their kids off to school with relative ease, where the Anguillians are able to fill their grocery carts at the stores, and the food lasted their families an entire month. The decisions made in each of the budgets for the last 4 years have weakened our spending power, raised our cost of living, and reduced our opportunities. And every time we accept handouts, we lose a piece of our independence. Mr. Speaker, let that sink in. Let us remind those in power that we want more than temporary relief. We want sustainable growth, an economy that rewards our efforts and policies that strengthen rather than weaken our community. Mr. Speaker, through you, I say to the Premier, if you truly care about the people of Anguilla, then give us a budget that is truly for us. Give us policies that allow us to keep more of what we earn, that support our local businesses, and that provide real jobs and not just temporary solutions. Our people deserve to live with pride and self-reliance, not on dependency. And this is the Anguilla that the members of opposition will continue to fight for. Mr. Speaker, I want our Anguillians to remember the faithful words spoken by our Premier in his opening address, where he said, the choice we make in who we elect to lead matters. Let me repeat. The choice we make in who we elect to lead matters. He is absolutely correct. And that is because the people of Anguilla today are in dire need of an open, transparent, honest, mature, and stable leadership. The type of leadership which is currently missing from this APM administration. And with that I say, Mr. Speaker, that I pray for God's continuous guidance over Anguilla. Thank you.
Thank you, Member. In accordance with Rule 13, I invite the Member for Island Harbor, the Honorable Premier, to respond to the Leader of the Opposition's response if he wishes to. Honorable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for this opportunity to respond. Mr. Speaker, the legislative agenda for the 5th session of the 12th Anguilla House of Assembly was presented, and I assume by now that it is published. And this agenda, Mr. Speaker, it addresses consumer protection to make sure that our consumers, who are the people of Anguilla, that they benefit from the policies and programs put in place by this administration, which is looking out for their well-being and best interests, and to ensure that when they go to the stores that the cost of living is catered to. We look at the decreased cost of living intention by the zero rating of the remaining food items. And contrary to what the member for Sandy Hill said earlier, the directive to remove GST from all remaining food items except alcohol and candy was given to the Ministry of Finance long before the AUF GST relief plan was presented to the public. And that can be confirmed by the Ministry of Finance. So you don't have to rely on me to look at the veracity of that statement. We're also looking at security, protection of children and the rest of the population, Mr. Speaker. And you see that in some of the the acts that will come to this House during this session. We looked at protection of workers, looking at road safety, health protection, where we want to ban tobacco in public places that can affect the health of our people. And certainly looking at the list, Mr. Speaker, we can see that there is a concerted effort here to also advance our tourism offerings in terms of repealing the Jet Ski Prohibition Act so that jet skis are available once again in Anguilla, because our visitors to Anguilla want to see services, sun, sand, and beach, yes, hospitality of our people, which is nonpareiled throughout the Caribbean and the world. Our hospitality workers are the best there are. But they want other things to do so they don't have to leave and go elsewhere when they come here. They want to be here to participate. And so the dive tourism, which is coming, another initiative by the Minister for Tourism. We want to make sure that, if we have criminals and those who fall afoul of the law, that we can keep them where they're supposed to be, but also rehab them. And see, these are all considerations in the upcoming acts and legislation that will come to the House. So I know the acting Attorney General, he's cringing in his seat behind me because he knows that there's a lot of work for him to do. And we welcome you, Attorney General, Honorable, back to Anguilla. But Mr. Speaker, it is sometimes interesting to listen to responses from the member for Sandy Hill, because there's a train of thought that seems to run through all the members' responses, which is anything good that the APM administration is doing or has done, the AUF thought about it, started it, or in their mind somewhere they would have done it but didn't. And anything else that doesn't seem to be as popular, they had nothing to do with it. This is a trend and a theme, and I'm sure that this will be ventilated throughout the soon campaign in the next elections. But the member talked about that I stated our first year was one of survival. And Mr. Speaker, and the people of Anguilla know that we came in 3 months into the pandemic being declared by the World Health Organization on March 11 of 2020 as a global pandemic. The country was closed down. We had 3 cases at that time that recovered, thank God. But we also had a country that was reeling from not only the potential loss of life that was possible with the COVID-19 pandemic, but the loss of livelihoods. Our main industry was shut down. And I want to thank God for our team, the Anguilla Progressive Movement, that came up with a plan on the auspices of the Single Island Wide member, Mrs. Quincy Gums Marie, for a bubble concept to open up the country when we were accused of trying to kill our people. And this is a fact by the members of the opposition present and those past who accused us of wanting to kill the people of Anguilla by opening the country in a phased approach, in a bubble concept. And that allowed us to have an economy that started up again with the hospitality industry, because we had over 3,000 persons who were at home relying on the unemployed and underemployed benefits. Now recovery. As I just said, hospitality industry was closed down. People were at home. The public servants, that we protected their salaries, because there was an act that was passed before the election that said that civil servants would take a 5% salary cut. and which would have been implemented after the election had the AUF been successful. But I just want to go to the goods and service tax, which was mentioned by the member for Sandy Hill, the leader of the opposition, the leader of the Anguilla United Front political party. The AUF signed the MOU. But before that, back in 2018, the AUF went to Executive Council on the 4th of June 2018 to approve in Executive Council the implementation of the goods and service tax. And it would be in 3 phases. Phase 1, which would include the IGT, and then phase 2 and 3. So when I say that they started the goods and service tax, that's what I said. When I said they implemented the goods and service tax, and the member said 2021, I was talking about in 2018 when they approved it, and 2019 on the 1st of October when they implemented the phase 1 of the goods and service tax. If it looks like a duck and it quacks, it's a duck. Now, I also explained in my presentation 1 week ago why the GST implementation was a fait accompli. And I may not have said last week who told me this, but this was told to me by His Excellency the Governor Tim Foy on the day after the election when I met with him in his presence and the presence of the former Attorney General, when I was presented with a sheet of paper that showed the finances of the country, which were dismal, the obligations of the country, which included the debt servicing, which included the salaries that had to be paid to public servants, which included the bills that were owed and the arrears. And I was told that if we couldn't come up with this $23 million within 2 weeks, we couldn't pay the debt servicing, which was due in 10 days, that it would be a constitutional crisis, because if you can't pay your debt, you become a failed state. The UK has contingent liability. Therefore, they would have to suspend the Constitution, and they would take over the country. I've said that before. And I told that to the rest of the government at that time, and also to our advisors, who now may have short memories, some of them, and they, come up with different statements, but they were there. And the voice note and the statement that I put out on the 9th of July 2020 was approved by the government and by the rest of our advisors who were present at that time. They even helped to write it. But the member also talked about the banking resolution. But what the member failed to mention is that the 2 indigenous banks were controlled by the Anguilla United Front. The chief minister, who was the leader of the Anguilla United Front, was the chairman of the board for the Caribbean Commercial Bank. The managing director of the National Bank of Anguilla was a family member of the Minister of Finance, who was the member of the Anguilla United Front. So who caused the demise of the 2 banks, Mr. Speaker? The people of Anguilla need to ask, what is the history and legacy of the Anguilla United Front in Anguilla? And every time when you hear Anguilla United Front, you think about 2010, when the Anguilla United movement came into office, that there was a deficit of $70 million, that there were bills to be paid of $14 million, and that there was overdrafts at NBA of $18 million. So it's always negative. Now, the member talked about the budget speech back on May 7 of 2020 and shortfalls, and that the UK government said that they would guarantee the shortfalls. But they failed to mention the conditions that came with those shortfalls, including condition number 3 in the MOU for financial aid for COVID relief, which said that you had to progress the goods and service tax phases 2 and 3. Now there were dates that these were going to start. And so when they talk about we didn't negotiate, we negotiated hard. There were certain conditions that were due on June the 30th, the day after the election of 2020. So we negotiated those, whether it was to September 30th or beyond, including the implementation of the goods and service tax phase 2, which would have been the 1st of January 2021, which we negotiated down to 18 months later, 1.5 years after the AUF would have brought it into place, because at that time we knew that we'd have a better chance of knowing what the outcomes of the pandemic would be. By that time, we already had, direct flights from the United States mainland. By that time, the country was opened up, so we knew what the economy would do. So that was a better time. But the AUF signed off on June the 11th of 2020 to an MOU that said they had to put the second phase of GST in place on the 1st of January 2021, when they had no idea, no cotton-picking idea of when the COVID-19 would calm down, when the country would open up, whether there'd be community spread, whether people would be alive or dead. There was no thought at that time that there would be a vaccine that was possible, that at that time we would be able to get the vaccine, and then that would decrease the chance of dying from the pandemic, or that being sick to be hospitalized. None of that. But here they can stand and pontificate about, they would not have brought it in, they had signed off on it, but they would kick the can down the road. This has always been what Anguilla has had to deal with under the Anguilla United Front, is that they continue to kick the can down the road, and that is why we had the debt that we have, that we encountered $494 million of debt. Because the AUF continues to not take the responsibility and kick things down the road, heaping up debt on the children and the children of the people of Anguilla. Now the member talked about the ASPA losing $800,000 a month. Health Authority of Anguilla having deficits. Yeah, we encountered those. Well, what did you guys do about it? Nothing. Nothing. And so when we came in, the British are saying we're going to give you up to 100 million EC dollars, but you got ASPA that is in deficit, you got the Health Authority that has arrears heaped up. And how do you deal with that? You got the Water Corporation that is basically just building up debt after debt after debt. What have you done about it to preserve these entities? To preserve these entities, we had to raise the fees or give them permission to raise the fees, because that is what was required to keep those entities functional. So when they talked about we raised 18 different fees, the reason why we did it was not so that they can just be flush. It was so that they could survive, those entities. And when we brought Health Authority and Water back under central government, is because they were not going to survive at the rate they were going. Health Authority had every year $4 to $6 million that was unaccounted for. And when these audits were done, when they did them, because from 2004 to 2023, you know, there were very few years that audits were done that were unqualified, which basically means that, you know, there were gaps that, you know, you couldn't account for. So the EC $100 million was not a secret when we came in. We had heard about it. But the conditions were kept secret. Now, I stated that the AUF implemented GST in 2019 by starting the GST Phase 1, which included the IGT, on the 1st of October 2019. And so the members said that we didn't push back on the British. Now you come in. And somebody already signed saying that this is what we're going to do, and government is continuous, so this is what you are given, and this is the time for us to push back. Why didn't you push back in 2018 when it went to Executive Council? Why didn't you push back in 2019 when you were when you implemented it on the 1st of October 2019? And why didn't you push back in the middle, 3 months into a pandemic? June 11 of 2020. Why didn't you push back then? And so, the people of Anguilla are not stupid. They know that the GST, even though we campaigned against it, that when we come in and we're faced with a $23 million deficit, that the $100 million that the UK was going to give was not going to cover that. And you had ASPA, and you had Health Authority, and you had water, and all the other statutory bodies, except Social Security, that were running arrears and contingent liability on government and thus on the UK government, that they are not just going to sit back and say, okay, you can now back away from the commitment that you've made. That is why we are where we are. That's why Anguilla is where it is. But thank God for the Anguilla Progressive Movement Administration that has moved Anguilla from the deficits and the debt that we encountered to now on a strategic path to progress, to economic stability and economic and financial stability, and moving forward to where we need to be. The progress that we have made in this country is one that will go down in history, and for the better. On July 19 of 2024, at the changing of the chairmanship of the Monetary Council, the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank showed that Anguilla in 2023 had positive growth of 8.2%, when the average for the other members of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union was 4.5%, almost double. That's how much progress Anguilla is making and continues to make. And as you heard me say earlier, in reading the medium-term economic and fiscal plan statement, and which is before you, it shows that Anguilla's growth is a positive 4.42% compared to what the ECCB in our last meeting showed is a 3.8% growth. Anguilla continues to be above the rest of the countries of the Eastern Caribbean Country Union. And Anguilla will continue to do that because you have an administration that is fiscally prudent and continues to look out for the well-being of its people and for the best interests of the country. Now, the member also talked about that we are hurting businesses by charging the GST at the port. They have to pay up front, affecting their cash flow. Now I'd like to postulate to the member from Sandy Hill that that is the same way that the IGT was administered. The 9% IGT was collected from businesses at the port up front, and they had no way to claim it back. Whereas with the GST, which is not a tax on businesses, the items that they pay GST on, they pay it up front, and then they claim it back the next month. So if they were paying 9%, they were not bothered by that. They pay 13% on some items, and they can claim it back. Which one is better for the business? Now, as I said earlier, the plan to remove GST from the remaining food items was presented to the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance months before the AUF GST relief plan was released. And I just want to talk a little bit about Anguilla since it was raised. Now, we've always believed and stated that renewable energy is the way to go to decrease the cost of electricity. And we felt, continue to feel, that an RFP, a request for proposal, goes through procurement and then distributed widely in Anguilla and elsewhere, open bid, and open to Anguillians also, that you get tenders, goes through procurement, whoever wins that bid then builds a renewable energy farm and then have a power purchase agreement with Anguilla as the distributor to provide cheaper, greener, and more affordable electricity. That is what our plan is and continues to be. Now, Anguilla made a proposal of a phased plan. We have never told Anguilla that they couldn't do what they wanted to do. Even though the government is 79% shareholder in Anguilla, we have never said that you can't do your plan. But we said, if you can't afford it, which we think you can't because Anguilla was asking government to help it with funds. At one time, Anguilla was even asking government to guarantee a line of credit at one of the local banks. So if you can't afford it, then you can't do it. Because you can't get a loan without approval of government from the CDB. Maybe they could have gone commercially, but again, you have to be able to show that you can afford it and to be able to pay it back. So what we have said, we feel that it is cheaper and or decrease the cost of living faster through decreased cost of electricity if you transition fully away from fossil fuel. Not away from tourism, from fossil fuel. So my feeling is that if Anguilla could afford it, they would have gone ahead with it. We have not held them back from doing it, but they haven't. Over 2 years after they made the proposal for a phased approach to a renewable energy transition, they have not done anything in that regard. So we still say, we move ahead with an RFP, you get bids, you get a developer and investor who can do this, and then a power purchase agreement to decrease the cost. In some cases, the projections show that you're decreasing the cost of electricity by down to almost 20% of what it is right now. And the .ai domain name registration revenue. Again, we don't get into details about why the .ai domain name registration was put out to tender. In fact, the member for Sandy Hill, if she really wanted to know, she just have to look 4 spaces down to the end of her bench. And 4 spaces down on the end of a bench is former Minister for Economic Development, the Single Island White member, Mr. Kyle Hodge, who's the one who actually was the minister when this was put out to tender. Now, I don't know if they talk to each other because they have different ideas. Some say repeal GST, some say come up with a relief plan. Some say you got to go independent if you want to do anything about GST. So I don't know if they talk to each other. But I do know that if you really want to know the reason why it went out to tender, ask the minister, the former minister, and then there'll be certain words that might come up like, reliability and collecting the revenue, lack of accountability. There's lots of words that can come up, but the minister, former minister, would know why. Because this was done under his watch. And I'm sure at that time he agreed that it should go out to tender. Now it was open to everyone, Anguillians and non-Anguillians. I had Anguillians who came to my office and asked about it. So it's not like they didn't know that this went out to tender, and they could have made bids if they could meet the technical requirements. Now, one of the things was of concern is that you have one fiber optic cable that come into Anguilla, a yacht ran over it, cut it off, so then there's no access to the outside world. If you are now selling these domain name registrations, you have to cater for this. So if you have a company on the outside that has the known track record of helping other countries develop their domain names and increasing their revenue significantly, some doubling within the 6 months to a year, then the best chance of protecting this entity, of getting the maximum revenue out of it, is having more access to it, more marketing capability, and also putting in that contract that they had to then train Anguillians and help us with the capacity to take it back within a 5-year period so that we then can manage it. I think that that's good. I also can tell you that we have a better revenue structure in terms of the percentage that comes back. And we have a guarantee that there's a certain amount that we will get every year, which is higher than the amount that we're getting now. So if you have a guarantee, that to me seems, that you have a greater potential of them being incentivized to push it to its maximum. But again, these are, there's a lot that we can say and talk about that we don't come out and give out all the details because some things are proprietary. And when I use that word, there's a certain person who used to be on Wall Street who will come and attack us. So I'm not going to go there right now. Now, what really got my goat this morning, though, is when the member for Sandy Hill said that relief to the people of Anguilla is a gimmick. How could relief be a gimmick? You're helping people. When I walk the streets, I hear people say, thank you for reducing our current bill. I heard people in August and September say that their current bill was 3 times what it used to be, right? So as a responsible administration, the government doesn't cause the cost of electricity to increase. Anglic doesn't pay, customs for the fuel that they get. So there's no government return on that. Now they'll talk about, the $750,000 that they pay as a licensing fee, but that was there before us. Right? Now, we give electricity subsidies to decrease the electricity payments that Anguillians have to make. At this point, we've given $3,000 per household in the last couple of years for electricity subsidies to help to decrease the cost of electricity, of the payment, so that decrease their cost of living. Now I'm sure that everybody who live in those 6,100 homes are grateful for that, because that's money now that is put on their bill that they don't have to come out of their pocket to pay. But what I think we should realize is that the increase in the electricity costs emphasizes the need for us to go to renewable energy. I mean, if you're paying so much for electricity that's fossil fuel generated, and you have a fuel surcharge that is so high, if you go to renewable energy, then that fuel surcharge is gone, because we're not going to pay for the sun or the wind or both. And then, if you transition fully, then you decrease the cost to generate it. There was a study done by Castalia back in 2011, 2012 that showed that with the solar panels, you can decrease the cost of electricity to about 15 cents per kilowatt hour. Think about that savings. And the cost of, well, I'm not, versed in these things, but I'm sure we have heard the cost of solar panels has decreased significantly since 2012. I would have to rely on Minister of Infrastructure, but certainly that is what I have read. So decreasing the cost is important. And if Anguilla had gone ahead and allowed the RFP to go through procurement and go out, I am sure that we would have already had solar panels on the ground, and we'd already have started decreasing the cost of electricity using renewable energy. So when I say what I said about where the obstructions are, anybody can make that correlation. Now the member talked about APM restoring the 15% salary cuts after COVID, which the member and her colleagues took. She said that if offered, she would take it, and the people should take any relief offered. Well, I agree that if relief is offered, you take it because it helps. It's just like the Senior Shield. There are persons whose family members have been in the hospital for months, where they rack up bills of over $80,000. And they say to me, thank you, because now I don't have to pay that $80,000. Can you imagine what they can do with $80,000 that they didn't have to pay for their family member who was sick? I mean, sometimes I wonder. Anguillians, I mean, I'm saying this is what I heard. And I'm going to just trying to figure this out myself. The member for Sandy Hill is saying that Anguillians should not take handouts from the government, but we should be begging for handouts from the UK taxpayers. I heard members of the opposition say that, they're going to go to the British and tell them that they have to give them money to finish the airport. Certainly they can do that. But if there are things that we can do for ourselves, why shouldn't we? Since when is it bad to help ourselves? Talked about, reducing the independence of Anguillians. That's what I believe in. I believe that we should be an independent people. And I believe that the only way that we can be independent is when we stop relying on others to do what we need to do for ourselves. And sometimes if we have to make a little sacrifice to show that we can do it, then that's what we have to do. And I think that the people of Anguilla, the majority of the people of Anguilla, understand that for us to progress, for us to be resilient, for us to be independent, that we have to do for ourselves. And we can't continue to rely on others to do it for us. We can't rely on handouts. We once again want to be the gem of the Caribbean, not the beggars of the Caribbean. You know, I remember the single island-wide member, Mr. Kyle Hodge, said in this honorable house that the people are saying, tax us, but not the GST. So they prefer income tax. And if the people think that the GST is bad, just think about income tax. Because income tax has to be set at a rate. It may be variable, but it has to be at a rate that can make up whatever revenue that you need to do the things that are essential for the people. Or they want a corporate tax. If you think the businesses are unhappy now with GST, when GST is not even a tax on businesses because it's a tax on consumers, wait on a corporate tax. Then they really would understand. And I've heard it said by members of the opposition that we should have income tax and corporate tax, not GST tax. And I guess with that they would put back on the taxes that we've removed, such as the property tax. So this is why we say, and I thank the member from Sandale for reminding us today of what I said, that we have choices, and that the choice we make who to lead this country matters. And I know that every red-blooded Anguillan, whether here or abroad, would agree with me that the APM presents. That is correct. People that care about Anguilla, that are competent, that have the passion to lead this country for decades to come. And in 2025, they'll have that opportunity to make that decision. And I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that if the people of Anguilla decide that they want the Anguilla United Front to be back in office, they're making a grave error. And this country will never recover from that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member.
Personal explanations? None. Other business, government business? None. Private members' bills? None. Private bills? None. Other orders of the day?
Member for Island Harbor is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just wanted, to say for those who have lost loved ones, we wish them, comfort, and those who are sick and suffering, that God grant mercy. I wanted to inform the people of Anguilla that Saturday of this weekend coming, I'll be heading off to London for the Joint Ministerial Council. The delegation will include myself, Minister Kenneth Hodge, a single island-wide member who's already there, Minister for Home Affairs, the Minister for Social Development and Education, Ms. Deanne Kentish-Rogers, the Permanent Secretary in Finance, Ms. Marissa Harding-Hodge, and the Public Relations Officer, Mr. Ivan Connor. And I want to to ask the people to pray for us as we travel and wish us well as we represent Anguilla internationally and in the United Kingdom. Certainly, there are significant areas such as water development, which we will be discussing, constitutional reform, border security. We'll be looking at also economic resilience, health. We do know that the Minister for the Overseas Territory, Minister Dowdy, when he was here in Anguilla, promised 2 new ambulances and a patrol boat. And so we will want to get more information on those and when they will be arriving, among other things that were discussed while he was here in Anguilla. So I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member. I wish traveling more safe for you and your team as you travel to represent us.
Adjournment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this honorable House be adjourned sine die.
Speaker, I rise a second. Mr. Speaker, I rise a second.
It has been moved and seconded that this honorable House be adjourned sine die. All in favor? Aye. All against? No. Okay, the ayes have it. This honorable House stands adjourned sine die.